Champions of Psychology is meant as education and entertainment. It is not a substitute for medical advice or professional counseling. Discussion of mental health topics will be primarily rooted in research and the personal experiences and self-disclosures of the hosts. While we can provide generalized education and possible mental health resources, we cannot offer any recommendations, advice, or opinions for any specific persons, cases, or situations. We provide these resources and links at our sole discretion, but have not necessarily vetted or reviewed any resource. We assume no liability for the use of the information or resources on these sites, and we encourage you to use your own best judgment.
Hello, and welcome to Champions Psychology, a show with the goal of openly talking about mental health and gaming, presented by Codename Entertainment and TakeThis.org. Every Tuesday at 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time here on Twitch.tv/CNE Games, Mitra Jordan and Raffael Boccamazzo, aka Dr. B, talk about mental health and how gaming affects us. If you're here with us live in the chat, well, that's actually going to kind of be the whole episode. Oh, and I forgot to full screen us again. I'm also in a different position, so like things are going to be all over the place today.
No, this is going to be so representative of our behind the scenes process.
Like no joke, we forgot to start the show on time. Like that's how ADHD we're doing this. Mitra said it was time and I didn't even realize it. But yes,
I'm shocked at me.
No, the code, Gauntlet Blade, the code makes total sense, and it's gonna be a bit of an erratic day today.
Yeah, it's gonna be great. It's gonna be awesome. I'm excited for it. And Dr. B said that he was going to field some questions.
Yes.
So we're gonna be doing that.
Yeah, but I suppose y'all should introduce yourselves first before we get into things. Yeah, the autistic kid is reminding you all about social niceties. What's up, Irony?
Oh my god!
I love it.
I usually go first, so I'll do that. Okay, so I'm Mitra Jordan. I'm a registered clinical counselor working here in Victoria, BC. I work with many neurodivergent folks as well as neurotypical folks. As we all know, and if we don't, we're about to find out, I have ADHD. And I have, I guess, plenty to say on the subject, but ooh, shiny. Sorry, that's a thing. It happens. What time is it again? Anyway, I will pass it over to Treavor over here in the Dr. B position.
Yes, I'm Treavor Bettis in the Dr. B position. I actually just realized I don't think I've ever introduced myself on this show, which is funny.
Nope.
Hey, I'm Treavor Bettis. I'm the writer for Isle Champions of the Forgotten Realms, a game you may be familiar with. And I do not have any real good knowledge about psychology and should not be taken seriously. Do not take anything I say and be like, well, Trevor said, no. And I have ADHD, if you can't tell, so... I have some things to talk about.
Never have guessed. Anyway, sorry.
Well, I'm really quickly, I'm Dr. B, Raffael Boccamazzo, Dr. B for long Italian name reasons, and I am a clinical psychologist in Washington State. I am autistic and ADHD. I'm the clinical director at the oldest mental health nonprofit in games, TakeThis.org. Go check that out. But let's get into this question, and I want to remind you in the chat, if you have ADHD-related questions, go ahead and type them in. We want to answer your questions. This is an AMA. Just begin
format.
it.
Do the format. Question,
capital
colon.
Letters, question with the punctuation mark colon, and then ask your question so we can flag it so our mods pick it up. Much love to the mods. Y'all are doing an amazing job. But let's get into this thing. Why, first of all, Mitra, Treavor, why are we talking about ADHD and doing an AMA on this for the second time?
I give that to you.
He's pointing in the wrong direction.
No, I'm pointing in the right direction for chat.
Oh, never mind. I'm looking at the wrong screen. Okay, this is why we're doing an ADHD AMA. We're doing it because this is the experience of ADHD is, in my opinion, much more common than perhaps we had previously at one point in terms of how psychologists understand neurodiversity. Previously, it had been thought to be less common. I think it's actually pretty prevalent And so a lot of people may, at the very least, experience some of the behaviors and at times the feelings that go along with ADHD. And it just seems really pertinent to talk about. And it's something we happen to know quite a bit about in terms of our personal experience, and for some of us in terms of our clinical experience as well. So.
Yeah. Yep. It is underdiagnosed, especially within the scope of people who don't look like Treavor and myself.
Yes.
A lot of diagnoses of people of diverse genders gets missed because when most people think about ADHD, they tend to think about what has been researched in cis male white boy populations. And
right.
it turns out that culture has an effect.
Absolutely. I think culture certainly also has an effect in terms of masking, particularly with, genders other than male. So if you grow up with the idea that you should sort of sit down and listen, or are really aware of the social expectations from a young age, it's easy for ADHD to get missed. So.
Treavor, I want to come back. I want to come back to you because Mitra and I do a lot of the talking most episodes, but I'm really curious for you. What do you wish people knew about your day-to-day life with ADHD? Because it's so often that ADHD is just like, okay, so it's not being able to pay attention to things. I forget things all the time. Big whoop.
Yeah. I mean, like, I guess, like, at the most basic level is, hey, it is a disability. Like, this is your level of easy, understandable task, not the same level as mine. Just the act of, like, doing the dishes, taking out the trash, for certain days, those are a mountain to climb. And it just understanding that even though this isn't a visible disability or something like that, I do need help with things. Not everything is easy for me like it is for you. I may be able to mask really well that I have these, social norms down or anything like that. I don't, though, and it is a constant process for me to keep up with them. And then, when I get home and it's just my wife and I, we are completely silent and we're just recuperating because we've been masking all day. But yeah, just kind of at the basic level that, yeah, this is a disability, and things are not easy to do. One of the things that I've started to do for people is, like, just go look up ADHD on Instagram stories or TikTok and see if you can find one of those videos that's like ADHD in first person, where it is a cacophony of sound going off of thoughts all at the same time. My favorite one is when there's one voice that's just singing a random song. Janelle Monáe for me today. So yeah, just that's something that I would like. If you took one thing away from this, that's what I would hope for.
Well, now, Mitra, for you, it's a little different because you're a mental health professional, which means you absolutely have no mental health challenges whatsoever. You are as emotionally cognitively and emotionally even keeled as possible. Otherwise, how could you ever do your job if you ever needed help?
Now, that's a fantastic ad. Could you share that with my family, please?
But I mean, for you, I'm sure that the idea of being ADHD hits a little differently. How does it manifest in your day-to-day life? And also, how is this different than just being forgetful?
Okay. So, first of all, I spent a lot of my life masking, not realizing
Which means what exactly?
Oh, that's
okay.
fair.
So, yeah, that's a really good question. So to mask one's symptoms in this case is, for me, to mask the level of distraction, forgetfulness, inability to time manage, impulsivity. I don't have a ton of it, but there's definitely a tendency to kind of, in sharing conversation, to kind of interrupt, or at times in my take over. And so a lot of it is kind of managing all of that. And the time management thing, just the emotional and mental labor, really, of kind of keeping on top of time when you don't actually have much of an innate sense of time. I worked as a pastry chef for years, and in terms of sort of baking things and knowing when they were done, I'd really rely on my other senses, like my sense of smell. Obviously, I would set timers sometimes, but I would be very reliant on all of the other signs that something was done. And so just the levels of paying attention in order to kind of manage time, that was a big one. And really, in terms of masking, which is to kind of pretend this isn't all a challenge, really. And it's especially if you don't know you have ADHD, you think you're just doing what everyone else does. Like there's not actually a conscious thought that there's something I'm masking. There's more of a really trying to step up and do all the things, not recognizing it's actually much harder for you.
Oh, yeah.
So you think everyone struggles the same way you do. You think time management is everyone's problem. And therefore, when there's some people who seem like they're effortlessly on time, you're like shocked and like, this must be so much work for them. And more important, how come this is so much work for me? So if it's effortless for them, I'm obviously doing something wrong. There is something wrong with me.
Yep.
And then there's masking to be like, I'm cool. There's nothing wrong with me. But inside, you're pretty sure something's very wrong with you. But no one has words for it. No one has a language for it. No one's talking about it. So it's kind of like, no, that's just a me problem.
Well, but if you, okay, so and this goes back to the both of you. If you can mask these symptoms effectively, doesn't that mean you can control it?
Oh my God. Oh my. Okay. Like the thing, because like I have heard that. It's just like, well, if you can just do that, what's wrong with just doing that? The amount of energy, effort, and mental strain it takes to keep up on it. Because like here's a perfect example that I've had in my head of like, let's just take like chit chat. For instance, you're in a situation where you have just met someone, you're both in the same place, you're going to be socializing at soon with other people, but right now it's just the two of you. In my head, I'm going, oh, there's that silent mark, which means that it's been too long since I've said something. I need to say something now. I need to figure out something that's going to be relevant to talk about, something that we can easily chat about for hopefully an amount of time that it's going to take for other people to get here, and that is just 4 thoughts in a sea of them that I'm trying to pick out and decide in split-second increments what to do for it. Instead of just going like, oh yeah, no, it's hot today, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. And what about when someone else is quiet for a little too long? I mean, yes,
oh my God,
thoughts,
they hate
but
me.
Also, yeah, absolutely. Or I said the wrong thing. For sure, I said the wrong thing. What wrong thing could I possibly have said? Did I let my impulsivity get out?
Mm-hmm.
Did I say something too familiar, or did I touch a nerve in some way, or did I? Yeah.
Well, now you're getting into something that I know for a fact a lot of folks who are both autistic and ADHD deal with, and that is the fact that one, with ADHD, emotion dysregulation is a part of it that a lot of people don't necessarily consider, because it turns out the same areas of your brain that regulate attention are also the same areas that help regulate emotion. And when
lucky us, right? Yeah.
Right. And it turns out, and research substantiates this, kids with ADHD in school settings are corrected several thousand more times over the course of, K through 12 than their non-ADHD peers. And so a lot of us end up learning through these thousands of times we've been told we got it wrong, that we just start assuming we did something wrong.
Yep. And
then the emotional dysregulation kicks in on top of it, that it now colloquially and inaccurately, this is called rejection sensitivity dysphoria. That's a whole thing unto itself, because RSD has zero peer-reviewed support as an autonomous construct. But anyway, I might be writing a journal article on that next year. But you two are both describing this, and that can turn into things like depression, anxiety. It's just it sounds horrible.
Yeah, sucks.
Because it is.
Yeah.
It does. And what also doesn't help is life happens, right? So there's usually other things that play into this. So for me, being raised in a different culture than the one I was born in, and kind of dealing with multiple languages, and also dealing with being raised by grandparents at points rather than parents. I'm pointing out that there were differences already between me and the other kids. I also didn't have a name that matched the cultures in which I lived for most of my life. And so feeling like an outsider was a thing. And as a woman of color as well, that didn't help in some of the places and times that in my life. And so there was already this feeling of not belonging, and then compounded by being neurodiverse, and of course not knowing it, and certainly not showing the, like, I don't think anyone of my generation was diagnosed as ADHD. I think that's a thing that started later. And I think, Dr. B, you can speak to this a bit more than I can, but I remember ADHD as a diagnosis really starting to grow legs, as it were, in the maybe early 90s.
Yeah.
And so, you know, and as you say, it applied more to sort of boys. And perhaps the main symptom or behavior that they were looking at was hyperactivity.
Yep.
Right.
So in terms of the other two, which are impulsivity and lack of attention or lack of focus, right? Those were kind of missed. And I would say for me, probably the biggest one was lack of focus. And I remember report cards that said things like, Mitra lives in a world of her own.
No,
it was a nice place, that world,
Yeah.
and there was a reason I was living there.
Yup.
Let's be clear. But you know, I lived in a world of my own, and of course, I could certainly pay attention. And this is the case with everyone with ADHD. There are things that are easier to attend to than others. There are things that we're naturally drawn to, that we're more able to attend to, that we're more interested in. And therefore, kind of that dopamine cycle is likely to kick in when we're attending to those things. And so there's well, you know, she's always been a good reader. So my language and reading skills started very, very young. I enjoyed reading, I enjoyed stories. And so I was able to start reading really early. So academically, I didn't suffer initially, but you could not teach me math. For if your life depended on it, I could not learn math.
I was the flip of that.
Yeah. Yeah. So then again, things get missed because it's like, okay, her math skills aren't great, but like, look at the reading and look at everything else that's coming along because of that. Also, I had real trouble learning a second language. And at the time, I was living in Pakistan, and the second language we're talking about was Urdu, which has a completely different script. It's basically the Arabic script. It's left to right. It's a completely different set of symbols. I couldn't do it. It was enough to learn English and to be able to fluently speak two different languages, English and Urdu. But in terms of being able to write a second language, being able to do math, so again, we've got two different kinds of symbols. My brain was just like, no, that's way too much. Can't do it.
Well, so for the both of you, because admittedly, this is a pet peeve of mine, that there is a lot of narrative, especially on like ADHD TikTok and ADHD Twitter and so forth, about ADHD as a superpower. And anecdotally, I've noticed that the people who call it a superpower are people, by and large, who have all the supports they need.
Yeah. Yep.
And in those cases, it might, sure, if you're not, you know, dealing with deficits day in and day out because you have all the supports you need, I'm sure there are aspects that do feel like a superpower, but I'm curious what your thoughts are on that narrative.
I will say after we do this, we should get into. We got a lot of questions so far. So
I've got 6 so far, and y'all are coming in hot with great questions. Chat, keep that up.
So I will say when the planets align, sure. Like, for instance, this weekend I had an idea for a new book project, and it became a hyper focus for me. I mean, so much so that it's a gothic horror. I started reading Dracula, replaying Symphony of the Night, and starting the Castlevania anime, all in the span of 3 days. And so, like, it lined up for me. I had a hyper focus, and I've got a bunch of ideas out and everything like that. As soon as that hyper focus is gone, though, that project is going to be a freaking struggle. Just
Yep.
it's going to be pulling teeth, but I'm like, but it has a lot of, it's got really good legs, and we can do something with this if I could just harness the focus to work on it again.
Because you can't control the
can't control
hyperfocus.
No.
It happens when it
God.
happens.
If I could control the hyperfocus, y'all, I'd be the most published author. Like, oh my God.
I know. Yeah. And this is the hardest thing, because the only way I can do a thing that is complex with a lot of moving parts, and I am very good at that broad base, complex with moving parts, I can keep it all in my head, is if I'm in that state of hyperfocus, right? The only other way is long hours of experience and being able to move it from hyperfocus into sort of intuitive knowledge. But that's a whole other thing. So if we're relying on hyperfocus, which we did when I was writing my master's thesis, by the way, the only way I could do that was be able to have hours where that's all I'm doing. Mm-hmm. So I had 3 little kids, y'all, and there weren't always hours, but when I was finally really getting to write my thesis, I was barely home. I had an office that a friend had loaned me so I could work, and I just spent all of my time that I could afford with my butt in the seat. And sometimes it was that process of waiting for the hyperfocus to kick in while not distracting myself too much with other things. Because the enemy of hyperfocus, or even any kind of focus, is procrastination. And there is, at times, see, when the stars align, hyperfocus is an easy state to move into. And in fact, sometimes it's compulsive, and you really just want to not be there. Like you'd like to set down that particular rabbit hole and go about your life. And that's really difficult. But it's the process of like moving between tasks that's super tough. Yeah. So if you're actually in the swing of doing things and it's a thing you have to do, you're terrified of stopping. Yeah. And you're also super irritated by anything that pulls you out. So you can kind of be really hard to live with. And at the same time, if you're in it and can stay in it, yes, you can get things done. But then when you set it down for that day or that night or to do something else, you're terrified you'll never find it again. So it's really, really difficult. It's like an altered state that you have a love-hate relationship with. Yeah. For instance, sometimes I love sewing, and there's times when hyperfocus takes over, and then I look up and it's like 5 a.m. or something. Yeah. So I only ever allow myself to get into that state on weekends or when I have an extended break, because otherwise I'll get pissed off if I only have an hour or two. Doing things I love in just small snatches is super hard.
It's so annoying.
Yeah, it's hard to explain to people who don't experience it, because it's like, well, why don't you just set this time aside and do it for this thing and do that? And it's like, no, I'll just get really pissed off, and I'll also waste the time. Or I'll start to do it and I won't want to stop.
Just one quick, I know Dr. B's got one other thing after this, but I won't put this in here. The procrastination isn't just things we don't want to do.
No,
that's the other thing that I want you to understand. We're it's not like we're like, oh, I don't want to do the dishes because I want to go play video games. No, it's like, well, I don't want to do the dishes because getting off this couch sounds like an insurmountable mountain. I could go play video games, but then I'll get that guilt trip in my head for 4 hours, so I'm just not going to do it at all. I'm just going to sit here and scroll TikTok. Yeah.
Yeah. This is, I mean, if there, so many of the, and now I want to step in as somebody who also has ADHD. And autism. If it was as simple as people make it, like, why don't you do X? Why don't you do Y? Why did it sounds like X, Y, and Z? We would have fixed this by now.
I yell at them the same way. Simple. I yell at them the same way people that tell me, "Oh, you're depressed, just be happy." I yell at them the exact same way.
Boy, you're having a hard time getting it done. Yeah. Have you tried getting it done? Well, shush.
Yeah. But what was that other question you got?
Yeah, no, I want to. This is a question that comes up a lot because there's a lot of folks who have trepidation around medication. And I'm really curious, understanding that with psychotropic medications, nothing works the same for everybody. And so frequently there's a frustrating process of kind of dialing in the right meds for you. And I'm very curious for the two of you. What was it like when you realized that they nailed it? They dialed in the right meds.
I mean, here's the thing. So right now, for reasons I don't have meds. I was on Ritalin as a kid, and I was on something else that I could never remember the name of in high school. But I don't feel like I ever did get dialed in.
Interesting.
So I don't. Here's the thing. I will say, if you have the ability to, and you can go do those tests, I do fully endorse it because of the ways that I've heard people talk about medication helping them with. I know when I was on Ritalin as a kid, they literally said he's a zombie. And that might have just been because they were like, all right, put him on Ritalin. Done there. But yeah, I think if you have the ability to, checking out, it's not going to hurt you. So
yeah, so I am on meds, and I think I remember being an adult during those times when I was hearing about kids on Ritalin, and I think one of the toughest things, if you were a parent at that time, which I wasn't, would be the idea that you were doing the wrong thing, that you were medicating your child to cope with a broken school system, for example. That was a big story that was going around at the time. A narrative, I should say, not a specific story around. So I think there was an awful lot of guilt if you were a parent with a child on Ritalin, right? And a lot of judgment about because there's always this sort of moral panic around medication, particularly for children. So, you were harming your child in some way, and a lot of misunderstandings around how medication worked. We can get into that. But in terms of my experience, that's a whole thing. In terms, medication and children is a whole topic. I often end up talking it through with parents and even with doctors sometimes. In my personal experience, though, Ritalin, first of all, there's a lot of different dosing now generally on medications for ADHD. So you can be on a pretty small dose, and you can be on a short acting or a slow release, longer acting. There's several different kinds of medication. There's also non-stimulant medications, etc. So dialed in is actually a pretty broad question in terms of what might work. Right. And so for me, I was very lucky because the first thing I tried was Ritalin. It's generally the first one people will try because it's been well researched. It's been used with really young children. It's short acting, so within 4 hours, it's out of your system. And it worked for me. And I think one of the first differences was a much better ability to cope with switching tasks and with managing time. That was the first thing. I just was a lot less anxious about getting things done. And also a lot less anxious about things that weren't finished. So to describe, for instance, the first time I really recognized I was dealing with something that other people weren't, and it was before diagnosis, before I understood what was happening. But I remember I was cleaning out my bookshelf. And we had a lot of books. And so I'd taken a lot of the books down. And so they were on the floor, and, it was sort of take out the ones you aren't sure if you're going to keep, leave all the ones on the shelf that you are. And so there was this pile of books on the rug that was by the bookshelf. So I'd gotten that far. And then, as I said, my kids were younger, and I got distracted by something else that had to be done, laundry, lunch, who knows. And I came back to that pile of books. And I just wanted to lie down with a cold compress over my head at that point. Like, I was just so overwhelmed looking at the pile of books. And I'm mentioning this because that overwhelm is sort of a fairly key experience that a lot of people with ADHD have, where it's like you were on a roll with something, you had to task switch, you get back to the something, and you just can't pick up where you left off. And it's this state of like, I felt like the books were kind of like coming off the shelf directly onto my head. And it was like, books everywhere. And it's that stopped happening once the medication was right, which, as I said, for me, I ended up with short term as well as longer term, and using them both as needed, sometimes together. So.
And so We've got a lot of really good questions from the audience. Y'all have been crushing it. Thank you for these really insightful questions. I want to preface as we go into the audience questions that we're going to be speaking exclusively from personal experience, and we cannot give you any direct advice.
Correct.
So often what we're going to say is, if this is a question, please talk to your medical provider, or please talk to your prescriber or a local mental health professional. We can give general answers, educational answers, but we cannot tell you what to do, nor can we diagnose you.
Correct.
So I just want to give that disclaimer as we talk about our own experiences, because our experiences are going to be different than yours, because we're different people. But first question I want to ask you both is from Aaron Burser 7. Question: I found that my boomer parent has had a very challenging time trying to accept that I do have ADHD, and I'm curious about other perspectives. Have you also found your parents, or just families in general, I want to expand, disregarding your diagnosis or downplaying it?
You want to go first, or should I?
Up to you. I can go first if you want. Or you.
I've got one. Yeah, So I'm gonna start with this. I the first time we did this, I think I said something about my uncle with all of this. My uncle, like when I was a kid, just straight up told me that ADHD didn't exist, and that I was just making excuses for things. Now here's the funny thing about that is, towards the later years of my grandfather's life, we kind of realized, oh, I think Grandpa has ADHD, and then my mom also got diagnosed with ADHD, and we just kind of started looking at the family and went, oh wow, no, like all of us have ADHD. Okay. And so the funny thing about him saying that is, he probably has ADHD. But no, like when it came to the like when I was a kid, it was ADD, and my mom didn't know that she was diagnosed. She wasn't diagnosed yet. And so in first grade, I got to a new school, and like the third day, my teacher like pulls my mom aside and she's like, hey, you should get him checked out for ADD. And she's like, okay. So she did. Sure enough, I had it. They put me on Ritalin. And because of that situation, there was never really a, you don't have it. There, like my moms were, yeah, by the way, I have 4 moms. Go check out the podcast From the Same Mister to find out why. But there was never really any like question among them of like, do you have it? Is it real or anything like that? It's definitely been a thing with teachers, and stuff like that. And so it's one of those things of just like, hey, this is a thing. This is real, whether you believe it or not. This is what I am dealing with. When it comes to like just trying to get people to understand in general, like trying like the how to ADHD, Jess's YouTube video, that or YouTube channel is a fantastic source, and I just talk to them about what your experience is and try to get them to understand, like, hey, I understand, like, this is what is easy for you, this is not easy for me. And just, I mean, I would try to have a heart to heart with that person if it's someone I was really caring about that's telling me, hey, you don't have this. But it's, yeah, it is a rough thing. There is an area of generations that do kind of just say, no, that's just hyper kids. You'll grow out of it.
That's a discipline issue.
Yeah. Oh God.
Not your brain being neurologically different.
Yeah.
So for me, my mom actually is a boomer, right? I'm Gen X, so that makes my mom an actual boomer. She's been super accepting of my ADHD and has come to accept her own, which has really been interesting because I was visiting her recently. And so we spent a fair amount of time together over the last, I've been back for just a few days. So we spent like just about 2 weeks together, solid. And it was really interesting to notice her acceptance of her own ADHD, which has come a long way since we last talked. Yeah, because we've talked a lot over, I think, the last few years about ADHD. My kids have ADHD, 2 out of 3 for sure. And so she's been able to really kind of observe my understanding of the symptoms of their experience of ADHD and mine. And she's come to understand her own. So, for example, we were in the British Museum, and there is a lot to see in the British Museum. And we, unfortunately,
some of it actually British.
Oh my God, it was super upsetting actually, but that's a whole other story. Like, can you just give them back their stuff? Like, what the hell? And also, you have this attitude of, well, it's here because we take care of it better. But whatever, we're not going there. In any case, but my mom and I, unfortunately, had gone in on a Saturday, which was the only day we could kind of make time for it. And of course, great time to go to a museum. Saturday, height of summer, it is packed. But where we sort of have, we kind of have our heritage in terms of being Assyrian. They had this, not Syrian, but Assyrian, and they had this huge exhibit. So we just wanted to kind of touch base with our own history that way. But it's packed, right? So we see that, we go through a few other things. Of course, we look at the jewelry. Man, ancient jewelry is cool. And then, ooh, shiny, right? And then
Literally.
she looked at me and she said, kind of feeling like I'm starting to shut down. I'm like, yeah, me too. She's like, one more amphora is just another amphora. I'm like, you're not kidding, So it was perfect, right? It was perfect because it was this shared experience both ways in terms of both the museum and also just our kind of like,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm reaching overwhelm, and however cool this is and however much FOMO I feel over not seeing it, I can't.
Yeah.
And that was great because before, I think we would both have masked,
Yeah.
spent several more hours there, and then been super irritated with each other afterwards.
Yeah.
No good reason, but just overwhelmed, right? So, and the conversation would probably have gone south, but it didn't.
Yeah.
And we were able to do that throughout the whole trip. So I just found that that's been so handy in terms of that broader understanding. Yeah.
I'll put in real quick before we get to the next one. My whole house now, like my wife and I live with my mom. All of us have ADHD, and since learning that we all do and ways that presents itself, the house has gotten a level of chiller where we're not just always feeling guilty about stuff. And we understand, like, oh yeah, you're having an ADHD day. Don't worry about it. Yeah.
Well, yeah, bad brain days when people understand that and can support that are really different. And we've gotten this question a couple times, and we've gotten this question from in different ways from both the Lady X as well as X Pterodactyl X. What's up, Sarah? Basically, how does ADHD manifest differently across genders, age, and culture?
All right. Okay. So for me, I think aside from the generational piece, one of my kids with ADHD was the one who did super well in school and was able to kind of focus through the school day and all that just fine. And so really got missed. And it wasn't until they started to have other challenges in their life that we started to talk about ADHD. And so noticing that the other child, so one of my children is kind of, I'm going to say, gender non-conforming. Okay, I'd rather do that than get into it. But the other is identifies as male and was the one who had some hyperactivity issues and trouble focusing on things that he didn't love. And so he was diagnosed with ADHD before I was really ready for it, or he was really ready for it. And it felt like a real abrupt kind of, not diagnosis, but labeled that way. And so it took a while for us to get our head around that. ADHD doesn't always manifest in ways that a parent can immediately go, oh yeah, hey, I see you, right? So it's a bit of a journey. And it was for both these kids and for me. I think that gender plays a part in terms of what's socially expected of girls and women. I think culture plays a part in terms of how well family recognizes ADHD as a possibility. And depending on where you grow up, the idea that you should sit down and shut up and be able to just learn, it was pretty strong where I grew up. And I went to a private grammar school, and I did that in a South Asian culture where learning by rote, learning by memory, being seen and not heard is a really big thing. And so I could pretend, to do that and go away with the fairies in my head. There was certainly some boys in my class, my grade, that I would look at now and go, no question you had ADHD. And the way they were managed was sit down and shut up, go to the principal's office, it was all of that judgment stuff. And so, as someone who may have had some of the same feelings, I was like, yep, not going to show that. And then I'd go home and I'd have these big breakdowns. I would either crash completely or I'd have some kind of tantrum. I remember my grandmother looking at me and saying, now don't go off on one of your, I can't remember what she called it. Episodes isn't the right word, but you get the idea.
Yeah.
Like
She could
fit?
see it
I mean,
coming.
that's a common
Yeah,
one that's used.
like some kind of fit, right? Because we'd go out, I'd get stuck on wanting to purchase something. She'd get upset, I'd have a fit. And my youngest, the boy in this case, also had the exact same behaviors. Like that getting stuck is kind of a piece of it. That
Yeah.
hyper focus where you can't let go. And I still get it sometimes. I'll go to the grocery store and it's like they have 8 shampoos, but they're out of the one I want. And there's a part of me that's like, now what?
Oh,
And it's weird. Yeah.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
Well, and to jump in a little bit on this, to speak to the ages, it's ADHD looks different across our lifespans.
Yeah.
Because our brains do develop. Now, there's research about what's called executive functioning, which covers a whole lot of different things, like planning, strategy, initiating, sustaining motivation, your response inhibition, emotion regulation, all sorts of stuff. Basically, if you think about things that are quote unquote adulting, it probably has to do with executive functioning. But within ADHD, our brain's executive functioning develops at a slower rate. So we do develop skills over time to compensate for certain things. But the challenge is that what we have to do also changes over time. And that's part of the reason a lot of folks get missed, because while these things may have been there as a kid, it's not really obvious until the demands outweigh coping strategies.
100%.
And anecdotally, one of the things that I see with a lot of my ADHD clients that got missed is that it is 6th grade in the United States and 9th grade in the United States are often where people go to middle school and high school.
Yep.
And a lot of the kids I work with, they could just do things without much effort up until 6th grade. And then it's a new set of tasks they have to do, like going to different classes, remembering different schedules and so forth. And that's where it really becomes obvious. Or they're gifted enough that they can get through 8th grade without needing to study a lick. But then 9th grade comes along and now they have these long-term projects over the course of an entire quarter. And they're just, boom, that's when it hits them. And so when it comes to age, just remember that your coping skills and your abilities will change over time.
Yeah, I think that for me, I really bombed out of university. My first year was fine, but that's because it was kind of an odd year at York University, and they had this thing called the winter summer program. So it went from January to June, much like a high school year might, and it was small. It had like 30 students in the class, kind of like think community college. And so I could manage it quite well. But when I came back for second year and I was suddenly in these big lecture halls with 400 and 500 students, and I couldn't do the thing that helped me stay focused in class, which was to participate, to talk, to be present in a way where, we're having a dialogue, that kept me focused. But when I was just supposed to sit there, again, just like my kind of grammar school, where I'm supposed to sit there and maybe take notes and just listen, there's a passivity to it that I would just very quickly tune out. So I didn't do any of my assignments in second year, and I bombed out and got debarred from school. And I never told anyone. I was so ashamed that I didn't tell anyone that was happening. I just said I was going to take time off and work. So through those years of early adulting, there was an awful lot of chaos. I would have a job for a bit, then I would get bored and switch to another job. I would live somewhere, but then I would switch to something else. And part of it was the switching re-engaged my attention. I didn't realize this until more recently, but that was what was happening. As soon as I got into a rut with something, my attention would start to disengage.
Yep.
And so, and also the work of adulting, that masking that we're talking about, was so exhausting that I would have days where I couldn't get out of bed. I thought I was just depressed, but it was more complicated than that.
Yep.
Well, I mean, it is because so many and this is something that a lot of people don't necessarily understand, is that when people ask me, or they come to my office and they're like, "Hey, doc, I'm having a hard time paying attention. I must have ADHD." My response is, okay, well, possibly, but you know what other diagnoses either directly or indirectly affect your ability to pay attention? If you say all of them that I can name, you are correct. And that's where it gets tricky in terms of psychological overlap, because we have these things called, so many of us have these things called comorbidities, where it's not just ADHD so rarely exists in a vacuum for all the reasons both of you have said. Anxiety, depression, also, trauma, all sorts of other things. So it gets complicated. But I want to give one more question before we wrap up. And this one is from Fifield 1. Do you find being able to focus on video games and movies a massive relief, or does it feel normal, or is it still a struggle?
I mean, hey, to use our tagline, it depends. Okay, let me give you an example. Elden Ring came out last year, and I love Soulsborne games. I've talked about them on the show before. That was a big thing for me, and like I was so hyped for that game. I played Dark Souls 1, 2, 3, and Bloodborne all back to back, and then hopped into Elden Ring. Like this was my jam. And I just kind of let myself do that, and it was really nice because I kind of did these things where I'm like, okay, well, I'm not going to play video games as much right now because I know I'm going to play a lot later, and kind of doing these things to make my brain be okay with spending as much time as I did playing it. And then there was a certain point where that ran out, and all I started hearing while riding around on my pretty little torrent horse was just like, you should be doing this. You should be doing this. Why aren't you doing this? This is happening. Why aren't you doing this? Come on, get up. Don't be doing this. You've been playing too long, over and over and over and over and over again. And so it depends on what has been going on with me, where if that hyper focus is okay to have. Because my brain will just sit there and come up with a list of things I could be doing instead. I shouldn't be doing this, and and then let's bring in all of the past culture that's like, oh, you're just wasting time. You should be doing these things. We're just gonna and it
grow up.
Yeah, and so like being able to have the time, like remember I said over the weekend, like I got this hyper focus and everything like that. Last night I literally said out loud, I'm gonna let the hyper focus win tonight. And I literally I had the Castlevania anime on, I was playing Symphony of the Night on a handheld, and like I was so gone that like I didn't even turn on the porch light, and it was completely dark outside and everything like that. And it felt really good because I was able to be like, okay, I don't have a show tonight. I don't need to prep for anything. I don't need to be doing this. It was one night where I could just take for myself and do the thing, and it was great. Those are few and far between for me.
Yeah. And I think that's actually a really good point, in that if I can set it up so that it's okay to take the space and just enjoy the process, then it can be very regulating, rewarding. I come out of it feeling refreshed, and that's great. The challenge is exactly that. Do I have a way to create the space for hyperfocus, or is it going to be in kind of conflict with those other things that I have to do? And my way of coping with that is either games where you really can only play for a certain amount of time because there's only so many quests, like
Cozy Grove.
Cozy Grove was great for that. Or you really can only play, say, with other people, and so you kind of, have appointments to do that thing. And some games are like that. But if it's a game, like I played World of Warcraft for years, and it did become really challenging because while you can certainly do a thing or two, learn a few dungeons with friends or whatever, and directionally, that was tough for me because I'd get lost a lot, which isn't so great if you're the healer. So that sucked.
That's a D&D character right there.
No
cleric with
direction
challenges.
fuck yeah. I mean, I had terrible direct. I always have. You say go left, I'll immediately turn right. I mean, it's terrible. Wayfinding is a thing, and I think it comes along sometimes with neurodivergence, but whatever. Anyway, so I either have to set it up that I know really it's okay to just do it for a bit. Animal Crossing is another one that's good for that, really. But if it's something that you can really kind of take the time, and I haven't created the time, then it gets to be that conflict, and then it's not relaxing.
Yeah.
Then it's actually a stress and a reason to beat myself up.
Yep. Well, and that's I want really quickly before we go out, I'll just say this, that because attention regulation is literally symptomatic. I mean, just regulation in general is symptomatic of ADHD. It's not like we can control that hyper focus. And similarly to Treavor, and you, Mitra, I can't let myself play single player RPGs when I don't have a ton of time to spare.
Yeah.
But even when I do, there hits this super saturation point where I'm just like, why can't I pull myself away from this?
Yeah.
And I've learned to get better about it over the years, but it becomes this hyper-focused ruminative thing past the point of being fun too. So it's not like hyper-focus is always a really good thing. No. It becomes its own challenge. But thank you everybody for all of these questions. We wrote some of these other questions down, and we're going to be getting to them later in the season. So please continue to watch, continue to follow along. Be here on Tuesdays at noon Pacific. But Treavor, take it away.
Hey, it's me.
I just mention one more thing quickly. When you are on medication, be kind to yourself at the evening time when your medication starts to run out. This is a conversation I've had to have with parents. It's something I've noticed myself. I just really wanted to bring to the attention of people who have ADHD or partners who do. Medication starts to run out right around dinner time. If a person is getting crabby, it's not always hangry. And if they're unable to focus after that, it might really be the medication. So I just want you to pay attention to what's happening for you. If you start to lose focus at the end of the day, or if you just you find yourself more dysregulated, just be kind to yourself. It might be the medication wearing off. So, yeah.
There you go. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. Thank you, Dr. B, for hosting this. We did get a lot of awesome questions that we didn't have time to get to.
Really did.
We might be able to get to them next week. We're doing our catch-up episode next week for questions that we've missed throughout the season. So yours might be in there. So be sure to be here next week at 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time to catch that one. But I think that is going to do it for this week's episode. Friends, where can people find you on the interwebs if they'd like to do so?
So I'm at Mitra Jordan, and also you can find me on mitrajordan.com. And the other two of you have way more social media than that. I'm just going to say this time.
What about you, Dr. B?
Oh, I'm around.
Oh, okay.
I'm on most socials. The Dr. B. That's TheeDocTorB as in boy. But more importantly, follow TakeThis.org on all the socials. We got some really cool stuff coming out. I just saw the first draft of our part 2 burnout for content creators video, and it's so good. Good. My hair was distractingly luscious in that.
I'm gonna have to watch it twice to get the full thing out of it.
Amazing. Yeah.
You can follow me on Twitter. Actually, you can follow me on most social media sites because there's so many of them now. At the Treavor, there's an A hiding in there. But yeah, thank you all so much for watching and joining us this week. That's gonna do it for this week's episode. I'm pretty sure the schedule is normal. I'm gonna stop bringing it up at the end of it because I don't know anymore. So there's no real point in doing it. You should just be sure to follow CNE Games here on Twitch and catch all the awesome programming that we do, because we do a lot of it, and we have a lot of really awesome people that put a lot of really good effort and time into this. So please check it out, and you get a little chest code for each one of them.
And thanks to our mods.
Yes, thank you to our mods.
Thanks,
Mars
mods.
and Gabe doing a fantastic job grabbing those questions and interacting in the chat. Thank you so much. I think that is going to do it for this week's episode of Champion Psychology. So until next week, take care of yourself.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Champions of Psychology is meant as education and entertainment. It is not a substitute for medical advice or professional counseling. Discussion of mental health topics will be primarily rooted in research and the personal experiences and self-disclosures of the hosts. While we can provide generalized education and possible mental health resources, we cannot offer any recommendations, advice, or opinions for any specific persons, cases, or situations. We provide these resources and links at our sole discretion, but have not necessarily vetted or reviewed any resource. We assume no liability for the use of the information or resources on these sites, and we encourage you to use your own best judgment.